The motel manager's warning seemed strange at the time. Don't answer the phone in your room after midnight. But when it rang at 12:37 a.m. and wouldn't stop, I realized he hadn't been joking. I was driving cross-country last spring, taking my time on a solo road trip. Around dusk one night, somewhere in rural Nevada, I pulled into a roadside motel off a nearly empty highway. The place looked old but clean enough, faded yellow paint, a neon vacancy sign buzzing faintly, and a handful of cars parked crookedly in front. Inside the office, an older man sat behind the counter. His skin looked weathered, his eyes sunken but sharp. He slid the guest book toward me without a word. After I signed, he gave me a brass key and then leaned in a little closer. "You'll be in room 12, he said quietly. "One thing you need to know. Don't answer the phone in your room after midnight, no matter what, got it?" I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was some weird local joke. But he didn't smile. His face was completely serious. "Sure," I said. I got it. The room itself was simple. Queen bed, small dresser, a dusty television on top. There was an old landline phone sitting on the nightstand. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution, and the walls felt thin enough that I could hear a couple arguing faintly in the next room. I took a shower, got into bed, and scrolled through my phone for a while before drifting off. When I woke up later, the red glow of the digital clock read 12:37 a.m. That's when it started. The shrill ring of the phone beside me cut through the quiet. It made me jump. I stared at it for a moment, remembering the manager's warning. Don't answer the phone after midnight. I told myself it had to be a wrong number. Maybe the front desk. Maybe another guest. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to ignore it, but the phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing. It didn't stop. It didn't even pause between cycles. It was a constant, relentless tone. My heart was pounding as I lay there, every muscle tense. After several minutes, I sat up, staring at the phone. The sound filled the whole room, pressing against me like static in my skull. Finally, against every instinct, I picked it up. "Hello?" At first, there was only silence. Then, a faint sound. Breathing. Long, slow, steady breaths, as if someone was holding the receiver right up against their mouth. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The breathing stopped. Then, in a flat, whispering voice, it said, "I can see you." My stomach dropped. I slammed the phone back into the cradle and jumped out of bed. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my cell phone as I tried to call the front desk. No answer. That's when I heard it. A soft creak, like the sound of a footstep, coming from right outside my door. I froze. The thin curtains covering the window by the door shifted slightly, as if someone had brushed past them. I wanted to look out, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Another creak. Closer this time. I grabbed my bag and quietly stuffed my things inside. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the door, I remembered the voice. "I can see you." What if whoever, or whatever, was outside was waiting for me to open it? The phone rang again. Loud, piercing. My head snapped toward it. This time, it didn't wait between rings. It was a constant droning alarm vibrating against the nightstand. I picked it up without thinking, almost in a trance. The same whispering voice returned. "Don't leave. Not yet." Then, softer. "Look in the mirror." I turned slowly toward the dresser mirror across from the bed. My reflection stared back at me, pale and trembling. For a moment it looked normal. Then the light above the mirror flickered, and I swear, just for a second, my reflection didn't move when I did. That was enough. I bolted. I yanked open the door and sprinted into the night air. The parking lot was empty, eerily quiet. I didn't stop to check out. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled the keys twice before the engine started. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced back. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting the rooms in sickly yellow light. And in the window of room 12, the curtain had been pulled back. Someone was standing there, watching me leave. I drove for hours before I finally pulled over at a rest stop, too shaken to keep going. When I worked up the courage to call the motel the next day, no one answered. I tried again later, and the line was disconnected. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't picked up the phone, or worse, if I had listened to what came after. All I know is I'll never forget that voice, and the way it whispered like it was already in the room with me. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone pounding on my motel door, steady and deliberate, as if they knew I was awake and waiting. What I saw through the peephole convinced me that something was very, very wrong. I was driving through Arizona last summer on a solo trip when I decided to crash at the first cheap roadside motel I could find. It was a squat single-level building in the middle of nowhere, lit by a flickering neon sign that just read, Motel. The place looked run down, but I was exhausted and didn't care. The clerk at the front desk was a thin, older man with sunken eyes. He hardly looked at me as he slid the key across the counter. "Not many people stay out here," he muttered. "You'll probably be the only guest tonight." I laughed it off, though something about the way he said it stuck in my head. My room was exactly what you'd expect. A sagging bed, a rattling AC unit in the wall, the faint smell of mildew. Still, it felt safe enough. I remember lying down and falling asleep almost instantly. Sometime later, well past midnight, I was jolted awake by a sound. Knock, knock, knock. At first I thought I was dreaming, but the knocking kept going, steady, unhurried. Each hit against the thin motel door seemed louder than the last. My stomach twisted. I sat up, my heart thudding in my chest. I waited, listening to the AC hum and the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I whispered a shaky hello, but got no answer. Whoever it was didn't call out, didn't move away, just kept knocking. I crept toward the door and pressed my eye against the peephole. My body went cold. There was no one there. The parking lot stretched out under the buzzing lights, empty except for my car. The walkway in front of the rooms was bare concrete, yet the sound, the knocking, was right in front of me. I backed away from the door, my breath shallow. It had to be some kind of prank, I thought. Maybe a staff member messing around. I picked up the room phone and dialed the front desk. The same old man answered after a long pause, his voice groggy. Yeah, I said, trying to keep calm. "Someone's knocking on my door over and over. Can you check the cameras or something?" The line was quiet for a moment before he answered. "That's not possible." "What do you mean it's not possible?" "You're the only guest tonight, and I didn't hear anyone come in." His voice was flat, almost irritated. "Stay in your room. Don't open the door." Then he hung up. I just stood there, clutching the receiver, listening to the dead tone. And then the knocking came back. Louder, harder. The whole door rattled in its frame. This time it didn't stop after 3 knocks. It went on and on, relentless, shaking the thin walls. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. I called the front desk again, but no one answered. Finally, the knocking stopped. I stood in silence, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for it to start again. I don't know how long I stood there before I forced myself back to the peephole. Still no one outside. But something had changed. The neon sign that had lit the parking lot earlier was off now. leaving the whole place in shadow. And I swear, for a split second I saw a shape standing just outside the glow of the one remaining light. Tall, motionless, facing my room. I stumbled back from the door, heart racing. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but the idea of opening that door was worse than staying put. I grabbed my bag and sat on the bed, gripping the handle like I might run any second. Minutes dragged by. The silence pressed in around me. Just when I started convincing myself it was over, I heard it, soft this time. Tap, tap, tap. The sound wasn't at the door anymore. It was at the window. The curtain was drawn, but I could see the faintest shadow behind it. Something was right outside the glass, tracing slow, deliberate taps with what sounded like a fingernail. I froze, staring at the fabric. The tapping went on for what felt like forever, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. When I finally worked up the courage to yank the curtain open, the window was empty. No shadow, no one standing outside. Just the dark stretch of desert beyond the parking lot. At dawn, I checked out. The clerk was there again, slouched behind the desk. He didn't ask about my night, and I didn't tell him. But as he slid my receipt across the counter, he said something that chilled me. "You're lucky," he murmured, eyes still down. "Most folks who hear it don't make it till morning." I left without saying a word, and I'll never ever stop at a roadside motel again. Hi. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of heavy footsteps directly above my room. The only problem was, the motel didn't have a second floor. I was on a long drive across Texas, heading west for work. By the time I pulled into a roadside motel, it was close to midnight. The place looked old but decent enough, a faded sign buzzing faintly, a row of rooms stretched along the lot, and just a couple of trucks parked out front. Inside the office, the clerk barely looked up from his newspaper when I checked in. He handed me a key for room 8 and said, "You'll sleep fine, it's quiet out here." The room was small but clean. A queen bed, a little table, a television from the 90s. The carpet was worn and the air smelled faintly of dust, but after hours on the road, I didn't care. I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed. At some point I must have drifted off, but around 2 a.m. I woke up to a sound. Footsteps. They were faint at first, soft thuds overhead, pacing back and forth. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe the motel had a second floor I hadn't noticed, or an attic where someone was moving around. But the longer I listened, the stranger it felt. The steps weren't random, they were steady, deliberate. Like someone was walking the same path over and over directly above my bed. I sat up, heart starting to pound. The sound grew clearer the more I focused on it. A slow walk across the ceiling, then a pause. A shuffle, then the walk again, back and forth. I told myself it had to be another guest, maybe a night owl, maybe a worker. But as I lay there, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I hadn't seen a second story when I checked in. The footsteps kept going. Finally, I worked up the nerve to call the front desk. The clerk answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Hey, sorry to bother you," I whispered, "but I think the people upstairs are pacing. It's keeping me awake." There was a pause. Then he said flatly, "There's no upstairs." I sat there in silence, gripping the phone. "What do you mean?" "This is a single-story building. No second floor. No attic." His tone didn't change, but he lowered his voice almost like he didn't want someone else to hear. "Stay in your room. Don't go outside until morning." He hung up before I could respond. The silence on the line was quickly replaced by the sound of those footsteps again, heavier now, pacing faster. Then stopping directly above me, The room felt colder. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and tried to stay still, barely breathing. After a long stretch of silence, the footsteps resumed, but this time they didn't stay overhead. They began moving, slowly, toward the wall. I followed the sound with my eyes, staring at the corner of the room as the steps seemed to trace along the ceiling and toward the wall above the window. Then, nothing. I sat there waiting, the blood rushing in my ears. Just when I thought it was over, I heard it. A creak from inside the room. It came from the corner by the window. A faint groan of wood, like someone putting weight where no one should be. I froze. The curtains moved slightly, though the air conditioner wasn't on. I forced myself to look, but all I could see was the faint outline of the window glowing with the Motel S buzzing sign outside. Then the footsteps started again, not above me anymore. Inside. I didn't move. I couldn't. They were slow, deliberate, crossing the carpet one step at a time. My eyes darted around the dimly lit room, but nothing was there. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me, like the atmosphere itself was thick with something unseen. The steps stopped at the foot of my bed. I shut my eyes. I don't know how long I lay there, shaking under the blanket, every nerve screaming not to look. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, because the next thing I remember was the pale light of morning seeping into the room. Everything looked normal. The bed, the carpet, the window. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been inside. When I checked out, the clerk barely glanced at me. But as I slid the key across the counter, I noticed he looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. I hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever hear footsteps at night?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then quietly he said, "You're not the first guest to ask that." I left without another word. And I swear as I drove away, I glanced back at the motel, and for just a second I thought I saw someone standing on the roof, watching.